At first glance, skill speed and spell speed seem like incredibly good stats. The more you have of it, the faster you can play. In fact, each 0.01 reduced GCD is granted at a linear scale, so the more you have, the better it gets. That sounds incredible. In fact, it sounds overpowered in a way. Except, it isn't actually that great. Actually, most jobs want a very specific amount of speed, if any at all. But why exactly is that? Well, it boils down to a few reasons, so let's talk about that. Speed stats increase the damage of auto attacks and dots by 0.1% every 14.6154 points. Every fourth interval, meaning every 58.4615 points, the base GCD of 2.50 is reduced by 0.01. For the most part, most other actions cooldowns affected by speed work almost as a multiplier of the base GCD. Naturally, skill speed only affects weapon skills and spell speed only affects spells. The first GCD reduction also happens with just 14.6154 points. Every GCD reduction after that will be more impactful than the last due to the relative difference in speed. This should mean that jobs that already have particularly fast GCDs should scale better, right? But the GCD reduction these jobs have, Ninja, Samurai and Monk as notable examples, stack multiplicatively, meaning that these jobs don't exactly benefit more from speed than other jobs. Despite that, this linear scaling with an ever-increasing effect sounds insanely overpowered, but there are a few reasons why it isn't. First, for all jobs, speed increases the amount of GCDs you can perform per minute, which both means more damage and more resources if GCDs happen to generate these. A concrete example is that a GCD of 2.40 has 1 more GCD per minute, 25 total, than a GCD of 2.50, 24 total. However, the cost of getting this much speed is equivalent to around 4% determination, just for the sake of comparison. Meaning that for this much skill speed to be worth it, it should boost your damage output by around 4%, which it kind of does. 25 GCDs is 4.17% more GCDs than 24 GCDs. Besides, for some jobs, the extra resources translate into additional OGCD attacks, which also help. Now, for jobs like healers, for example, that get the vast majority of their damage from GCDs, speed tends to be a very valued stat, although as we can observe with Sage that does not really care that much for speed, at least compared to all the other healers, having attacks that are entirely unaffected by speed makes it less desirable, and this is far more common with non-healer jobs. The other 3 healers value speed significantly more, and that is because of an emergent property of speed. It can allow you to cram more attacks into a short time frame, and if you have any temporary damage buffs at all in your job's toolkit, then speed can help with that. Most jobs have such buffs. Here are the jobs that don't. However, the value of this property is still directly correlated to how good the extra GCDs will be. For Astrologian, White Mage and Scholar, extra speed translates to extra Malefics, Broils and Glares during each of their damage buffs, which are, for the most part, very good attacks for each of these jobs. On the other hand, a job like Gunbreaker tends to gain additional 1-3 combo steps during their No Mercy, since all the big cooldowns can be spent with no extra speed just fine. This means that unless the Gunbreaker actually gains more damage from that extra GCD than they would from, say, Determination boosting their more powerful attacks, then there might just be no point in this angle at all. To be fair, Gunbreakers that choose to bring speed do it for a combination of reasons, as the resource generation can help make the rotation more consistent as well. This angle about buff windows is also further underlined by the 2-minute burst meta, as all jobs, regardless of what you yourself can bring to the table, will, in a coordinated group, have raid buffs every 2 minutes, and these buffs tend to last around 15 seconds, maybe a bit more, so for a lot of jobs, it all boils down to whether you can fit all of the important buttons in this 15-second window or not, and if speed can help you to fit everything, then speed is good. If it can't, then speed is immediately significantly less valuable. This 2-minute meta is likely the biggest common cause for the weakness of speed. and is the overarching reason why jobs that both gain a lot of value from speed through general damage output and through resource generation and don't even have burst windows themselves to worry about, still have burst windows and so care about maximizing them. These kinds of problems are made even worse by the fact that most cooldowns are completely unaffected by speed. And yet, even if they were affected by speed, unless this leads to more uses of the cooldowns over the course of a fight, or even better, more uses during raid buffs, then simply getting more damage out of the cooldowns when you use them is always valued higher, especially because of raid buffs. Again, the 2-minute burst meta. To make a concrete example, let's say Dark Knight's Shadowbringer scaled with speed, and you went with a GCD of 2.40. This would lead to Shadowbringer having a charge time of 57.6 seconds. In the opener, this changes nothing. 2 minutes into the fight, you will have to use Shadowbringer around 2 GCDs earlier in your burst, 4.8 seconds. 4 minutes in, another 2 GCDs, 9.6 seconds, and assuming you used both Shadowbringers near the end of raid buffs in the opener, this is the last time both Shadowbringers will naturally line up with raid buffs. 6 minutes in, the first use has to be 6 GCDs earlier than in the opener, 14.4 seconds, leading to a somewhat weird burst. Assuming that the boss fight ends in a very specific time frame where this extra speed allowed you to fit an extra Shadowbringer, but before you would have had that same Shadowbringer cast available with no speed, that is the only scenario where this cooldown reduction on Shadowbringer actually helped, which would be a time frame of at most around 20 seconds. In most other situations, which is the remaining 40 seconds of a minute, just having more damage from determination, direct hit or critical hit would have benefited the Shadowbringers you do get more. This is also reflected in how jobs that do have cooldowns affected by speed play around it. Gunbreakers have the benefit that because Gnashing Fang, Sonic Break and Double Down all scale with speed, they can continue to use them precisely on cooldown as their rotation progresses, and usually they won't drift out of No Mercy over the course of a fight. However, this still means that in most cases, at best, a Gunbreaker may find that they manage to fit an extra unbuffed Gnashing Fang combo in a fight due to their speed, or maybe an extra Burst Strike or two. Overall, the benefit Gunbreaker sees is more that speed isn't viewed as a hindrance or an annoyance, rather than viewing it as a beneficial component of the cooldowns. Summoners, who aside from Energy Drain and Searing Light, and to a degree Emerald Rite, can speed up their entire rotation with more speed, only view it as actually helpful, if it is possible to stack so much speed that a 7th GCD can be fit within Bahamut or Phoenix. If that is unreachable, summoners typically only get enough speed to fit 6, the specific speed breakpoint, which tends to be how speed becomes helpful for most jobs. And finally, Machinist, who, due to how Heat Blast isn't affected by speed, basically gets nothing out of their tools scaling with speed. Hypothetically, Machinists could circumvent this by stacking so much speed that their GCD goes below 2.2, but this is usually not even feasible, and even if it were, the job has so many other actions that aren't exactly benefiting from it, Heat Blast, that it would not really be worth it anyway. This is actually a common issue with jobs that have GCDs that have cooldowns unaffected by speed. For another example, dancers have a negative relationship with speed because either you use standard step every 30 seconds, which will cause you to clip your GCD for all the time you saved with speed leading up to it, or you use standard step 1 GCD after it is ready, meaning that the speed causes a very mild loss just to be able to become beneficial. Notably, standard finish is not that impressive potency-wise, so it isn't that bad. But technical step has the same problem, and should not be delayed like standard step. And with all that considered, there is the additional concern of weaving timing. For most jobs, the way they handle damage cooldowns is that they are used at a specific timing in the opener, and then you can almost just use the buttons again on cooldown and it all works out. Now, all cooldowns have a base cooldown time that is a multiple of 5. What this means is that if you have a GCD of 2.5 and you early weave, say, Blasting Zone in your Gunbreaker opener, then 30 seconds later, Blasting Zone will come up as an early weave, perfectly on time again. If your GCD instead was 2.4, then Blasting Zone will alternate between being a late weave and an early weave, and double weaves will be split up every 30 seconds, such as Paladin's Circle of Scorn and Expiation. This is still somewhat manageable, but if your GCD is something more unusual, then this cooldown timing stuff becomes even more complicated. Granted, the general idea is to weave things exactly on the next GCD opportunity when you can, but the problem is that speed isn't helped by this kind of strange detail either. Which then sort of leads us to how speed is being used now. Tanks, for the most part, lean towards having as little speed as possible, with both Paladin and Dark Knight having spells in their arsenal, making skill speed less valuable. Although, this is less of an issue for Dark Knights. Warriors tend to value making the most of their inner release bursts more, which they get every minute anyway. And only Gunbreakers are seen using speed intentionally every now and then due to the consistency it adds to the resource management of the rotation. Healers rank the value of speed proportional to the amount of their damage output that isn't benefiting from speed, with Sage carrying very little, Scholar and White Mage carrying somewhat, and Astrologian being one of the jobs that actually really like speed. All ranged physical, Red Mage, Ninja, Reaper and Dragoon have very little to no interest in speed at all, since so much of their damage either depends on other factors and the resources generated from the speed doesn't help that. And for Red Mage, Dancer and Machinist specifically, they have each their own sort of negative relationship with speed. But the exception among them has a slightly higher interest in speed due to a weaving timing detail in relation to Imperial Arrow. Summoner, Monk and Samurai each care about speed for specific breakpoints, with Summoner wanting just enough to be sure to fit 6 attacks in Bahamut and Phoenix. Monk and Samurai each have much more complicated reasons, as they both care about making sure their rotation lines up perfectly for their bursts every minute and 2 minutes, and the exact amounts of speed they care about are designed exactly to accomplish this, with Monks even considering frame rates to be absolutely sure everything lines up as expected, and Samurai having 3 common options that line up everything as needed. Notably, Samurai can stack quite a lot of speed if they so desire. And finally, there is Black Mage. In general, the job really does like speed, as a very large proportion of the job's damage output comes from endlessly spammable GCDs like Fire 4. However, as long as you have enough speed to fit the amount of spells in each Astral Fire state as you need to, then there is little difference between getting 10% more Fire 4s or getting your Fire 4s to do 10% more damage, unless the 10% more Fire 4s lead to more Fire 4s during raid buffs, of course. And you only get so many Xenoglosses over the course of a fight, and casting them faster does not make them stronger. You only get so many ley lines, you only get so many mana fonts, and you only get so many triple casts. So making the most of each of these by making the payoff bigger is very valuable. Because of this, and especially because of all the buffs Xenoglossy has gotten throughout Endwalker, not to mention the possibility of all the damage a Black Mage could gain from lining the rotation up perfectly well with raid buffs. That's right, it's the 2-minute burst meta again. High speed is still considered an option for Black Mage, but as you get more experienced with the job, slower builds tend to become more favorable. So to sum things up, the key problems with speed are threefold. First, a few select jobs simply can't even consider it an option because of the split between skill speed and spell speed, making it too costly. Second, the 2-minute burst meta greatly inflates the value of burst damage, making filler rotations far less impactful by comparison. And thirdly, even if filler rotations were more impactful, the simple fact that speed does not affect most cooldowns in the game means that unless the filler offers something quite significant, like a lot of resources, you're often choosing between doing 10% more filler attacks or doing 10% more damage with your filler attacks and everything else, which just never will be equal. Even if most cooldowns were changed to be reduced by speed, as I tried to highlight with the Shadowbringer example, the 2-minute burst meta would still make it more valuable to stack stats that directly increase damage rather than speed for the majority of jobs. At least, that is my opinion on the matter. However, on a brighter note, outside of extreme optimization and coordinated raid buffs and the like, speed can lead to a lot of interesting results with jobs. And you just might discover some sort of unusual rotation that is fun to play by getting more speed than someone normally would get on a job. Who knows, you might even discover a rotation that is better than the standard. But with that said, I hope you found this discussion interesting, but for now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can make sure to let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, at the very start of Endwalker, White Mage's Blood Lily was actually a DPS loss to use. A small one, but still, which meant that it was not recommended to spend lilies at all if you didn't need to. In an optimal fight, this meant that White Mages had absolutely terrible MP management, and because healers already rely on their MP recovery tools in their entirety to stay above water by default, and spell speed makes them spend more MP, White Mages were at that point not only recommended to avoid speed at all costs, but even maybe get some piety just by default. This was fixed when Blood Lily was made DPS neutral,